girlfriend of a Boston police officer whose body was found.
And the murder trial of Karen Reed after the jury said it was unable to
they
reach
will
a
retry
verdict.
Karen Reed
is
after a judge declared a
Alternates, we have arrived at day 16 of the Karen Reed retrial. And if I'm being honest, it feels more like day 125. But I don't know, who's counting, right? Well, let's get into it. Today's testimony focused on two key witnesses, forensic scientist Maureen Hartnett, who came back from yesterday, and medical examiner Dr. Irini Scordi-Bello. That's right. The prosecution aimed today and always to reinforce their theory that Karen Reed struck John O'Keefe with her SUV. All the while, the defense sought to highlight inconsistencies and alternative explanations. All right, first up was Maureen Hartnett from the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab, and she resumed her testimony from yesterday regarding the examination of Reed's Lexus SUV. She noted damage to the right rear of the vehicle, including scratches, a dent, and a broken taillight. And let's not forget the hair that she found on the bumper and a few glass fragments. However, under cross-examination, defense attorney Bob Alessi questioned the reliability of some of her findings. For example, the hair that she found was not secured with adhesive and could have easily been removed, raising concerns about contamination. Alessi also noted, and the witness confirmed, that there was no sand, there was no salt, there was no debris found inside the taillight housing, which one might expect if the vehicle had struck someone outside. And finally, the big aha moment was that Hartnett did not test the taillight fragments for biological evidence, which she defined as testing for blood, semen, or skin cells. Alessi also pointed out that the clothing collected from John O'Keefe was placed in a paper bag. Specifically, it was the orange t-shirt and the hoodie, and they were placed in the same bag without photographing the debris that allegedly was found on it, suggesting, of course, potential mishandling. And listen, when you look at the evidence bag, guess who bagged it? Michael Proctor. That's who. All right. Next up was, drum roll please, Dr. Irini Scordi-Bello, the Deputy Chief Medical Examiner for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. What? Can you believe that it took 16 entire days for us to hear from the ME? All right. I know you want to get into it, so let's do it. All right, let me warn you that this testimony is graphic, but it's also critical because cause and manner of death are foundational in this case especially. So who is Dr. Scordi-Bello? Dr. Scordi-Bello is board certified in anatomical and forensic pathology. She's performed thousands of autopsies, she's seasoned, direct, and the prosecution clearly trusted her to anchor the medical findings in their case. Even though, as I'm going to tell you in a second, you might recall from the defense's opening statement when Jackson said that even the Commonwealth's own ME doesn't agree that this is a homicide case. I'm going to get to that. Dr. Scordi-Bello performed John O'Keefe's autopsy on January 31st, 2022, which is 2 days after he was found unresponsive in the snow outside 34 Fairview Road. The official cause of death noted by Dr. Scordi-Bello was blunt impact injuries of the head with hypothermia as a contributing condition. But, and this is critical here, Dr. Scordi-Bello ruled the manner of death as undetermined. Now, let me explain what that means. Manner of death is classified into 5 categories: natural, accidental, suicide, homicide, and undetermined. So when a forensic pathologist, especially one who is this seasoned, classifies the manner as undetermined, that means the physical evidence alone doesn't definitively support any one scenario. That's huge for the defense and for reasonable doubt. Now, the prosecution was clearly trying to establish that Karen Reed struck John O'Keefe with her SUV and left him outside to freeze to death. Scordi-Bello testified that John's body temperature was 80.1 degrees Fahrenheit, far below the normal 98.6 degrees. That supports hypothermia. And the ME confirmed that it could have taken hours, any amount of hours for, to cold exposure to reach that temperature, like that body temperature of 80.1. But she listed hypothermia as a contributing factor, not the primary cause of death. But of course, it played a huge role, right? Especially given the blizzard conditions on January 29th. So let's go through the injuries because this is where things get complicated or complex. On the stand, Dr. Scordi-Bello used a laser pointer to walk the jury through John's injuries, using the ME form that has a drawing of a man, and she pointed out the following external injuries: a small laceration on the right eyelid, bruising and swelling around both eyes, abrasion to the nose, scratches and bruises on the right arm and back of the hand, a faint scratch on the left hand, a small scrape on the right knee, and critically, a large contusion to the back of the head with skull fractures. According to Dr. Scordi-Bello, the skull fracture was complex, meaning that it was not a simple crack, but a more fragmented break indicating a significant impact. Inside, like no kidding, inside of John's brain, she found bleeding on the brain and brain swelling, which could have caused him to become unconscious. So, it could have rendered him unconscious whenever this brain injury or head injury occurred. Dr. Scordi-Bello also noted internal hemorrhaging in the pancreas and gastric mucosas. Now, that's the lining of the stomach, right? So he has this blunt force trauma to the head, and then he has this injury to kind of his torso area, right? Like his belly area. And of course, that area to his stomach, it raised eyebrows for the defense and even for myself, because how would he have obtained those injuries if he had been hit by a car? I don't know. It's interesting. Defense attorney Bob Alessi stepped up for cross. And let me tell you, he came prepared. Of course, he had a whole entire trial to prepare, right? Because he did the first trial. Now we have the second trial. Now, Bob Alessi pushed hard on the possibility that these injuries were not caused by a vehicle, but instead perhaps by a fall, possibly even after a physical altercation inside the house. Now, after he said that, there was an objection and then a sidebar, and then they just kind of move on, right? That's what happens in trials, which is really frustrating because if you're nosy like me and like most jurors probably are, they're like, what happened? Like, what just happened? We just like changed subjects. But listen, Dr. Scordi-Bello did say on the stand during cross that the pattern of injuries to the back of John's head could be consistent with a fall onto a hard, icy surface, like a frozen walkway or even steps. Now, her admission to this is, I think, a win for the defense. Alessi also challenged the ME on the internal injuries noted, as I mentioned earlier, to the torso. And he basically questioned the hemorrhaging of the pancreas and the stomach. He asked, could those injuries have been caused by mechanical CPR, specifically the Lucas device used by first responders? To which Dr. Scordi-Bello answered yes. The gastric injuries could have resulted from resuscitation efforts, especially that Lucas machine, because it does apply repetitive chest compressions. Now, the pancreatic hemorrhaging, however, was less clear. Dr. Scordi-Bello acknowledged that it was possible, but not definitive. So again, the defense here is just chipping away at the prosecution's theory, suggesting that rescue efforts may have caused some of the trauma that was observed at the autopsy. Perhaps, though, the most striking part of Scordi-Bello's testimony was her reasoning behind classifying the manner of death as undetermined. She said it wasn't clear whether the head injuries were from a fall, an assault, or being struck by a vehicle. And that's important because the prosecution's theory hinges on one theory. Karen Reed struck John O'Keefe with her SUV, breaking her taillight in the process. And they are required to prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. But the pathologist didn't, and she says she couldn't. She couldn't confirm that theory with any amount of certainty. She made it clear that without definitive scene evidence or witness testimony of him being struck, the medical findings alone weren't enough to call it anything but undetermined. Now, this is devastating for the Commonwealth. Also, it should be noted that Dr. Scordi-Bello did admit that before she conducted her autopsy, her office did get word that the detectives believed that John O'Keefe had been struck by a vehicle. So Alessi basically made it seem like they were trying, like the Massachusetts State Police was trying to introduce some sort of bias into the ME's report. And at some point, she has 90 days to complete the autopsy report. And at some point, there was kind of like a, hey, should the ME get together with the Massachusetts State Police to kind of, discuss what was found? But anyway, Dr. Scordi-Bello she's a hard nut to crack, and she was not going to change her determination at all. But even despite any type of bias that the Massachusetts State Police was trying to whatever kind of pressure they were trying to put on the ME, it didn't work because Dr. Scordi-Bello would not budge on her determination. So, good on her. But listen, I am not so sure that the Commonwealth could rehab this witness or rehab at least her undetermined finding by the ME. Anyway, so when they got up there to do a redirect, I'm not sure. By that point, the jury had already heard what they heard, So just some final notes about today. Judge Cannoni did point out, before all of the graphic pictures were shown, she did point out to the jury, or she did remind the jurors to not let the graphic photos influence them in any way emotionally. Because yes, graphic autopsy photos are hard to forget, especially seeing close-ups of a deceased human. It was difficult to watch, but it was important and definitely something that the jury does have to see in order to make their determination. So where does this leave us? Dr. Irini Scordi-Bello, the Commonwealth's own medical examiner, gave detailed, consistent, and, in my honest opinion, she gave very honest testimony. She acknowledged the injuries were severe. She acknowledged hypothermia played a role, even though she did admit that there were no signs of frostbite, which I'm still very confused by. But she also admitted that she couldn't say definitively how John's injuries occurred, and she refused to label the death a homicide. In a case where intent is everything, that lands like a gut punch to the Commonwealth. So we'll see how the jury processes it, and I am sure that they are a little bit baffled and trying to figure out who's next. So who will the Commonwealth call? Will they call any of the residents of 34 Fairview? Will they call former trooper Michael Proctor? Will they call Brian Higgins? I don't know. I feel like as a juror, I would want to hear an explanation. Why did the residents of 34 Fairview, especially Brian Albert, not come outside? Why was Brian Higgins at the Canton PD? What did he grab from that other vehicle? And who was he talking to when he was exiting? I'm just nosy. Maybe he was just talking to his mom. I mean, we really don't know. But it would be good to bring him up to the stand to find out, And, what would former trooper Michael Proctor have to say? What exactly did he screw up during this investigation that caused him to lose his job? I have so many questions. All right, alternates, we will see you on day 17. But until then, think like a juror and decide like one too.